Right, welcome to the Wednesday Bike Club, everybody. So this will be my last bike club from France because I head home in a couple of days' time. So I've got my coffee on, as you can see. It's very important. But oh wow, so the weather improved. Goodness me, it's been so cold at night. But today, you know, in the warmer weather, I suppose it's about, I don't know, 12, 13 degrees. So it's made a massive difference. But I still need to get some more logs on the old pack horse here. So what's today's subject about? Well, it's something, and I've had to make a few notes just to remind myself of some bits. When you look back at last year, and certainly towards the back end of last year, how there was so much doom and gloom around the bike industry, wasn't there, motorbikes? Because we suddenly had this sort of this terrible sort of feeling of impending doom, because although we were coming into the sort of, you know, the back end of the year, you know, when a lot of people put their bikes away, you know, like me, I don't, but you know, we had lots of bad news. It was a what was it, a winter horribilis, wasn't it, for motorbikes? Because we had that issue with lots of motorbike shop closures. A lot of big dealers went down last year, didn't they? And particularly when I look in my area, we had P&H, which was a major player in Sussex, you know, for Honda, KTM, and I'll come on to that in a minute. And then we had a lot of other dealers sort of come out of the area. We had our Triumph one in Washington disappeared. And it looked like we were sort of at the beginning of the end of motorbikes a little bit. It felt like that. And most of the, you know, a lot of YouTubers were, including me, were, you know, looking at why is this the case? What's happening here? And we certainly had a lot of is this the word sterility? Like staleness in the motorcycle world, wasn't it? There wasn't much new coming out. And what I find fascinating about the motorbike world is that things changed so quickly. You know, we're in this age now of social media and mobile phones and technology. Is that the whole atmosphere of motorcycle and in general lots of things just changed so quickly. And I think we looked at sort of the, you know, the general sort of economic downturn at the time for being responsible for that. But come forward from it, oh, there's a lovely Morgan there. Oh, I don't know if you can hear that. Wow. Whoa, that sounded really nice. Anyway, that's what you need on a day like today. But come forward 12 months and look where we are. The motorbike world seems really buoyant again. And I thought it'd be interesting to look at possible why the reasons for that were. Now, we've had a couple of big changes, haven't we, that have happened, and one in particular. And I thought it'd be interesting if we could find a common denominator in all of that. And there is one. And I think it's money, isn't it? I think the motorbike world was getting expensive. And I need to qualify that as a little bit as well. I think we were sort of thinking that we weren't getting the quality we were paying for anymore. We were sort of paying through the nose for it. And when you look at companies like, particularly say BMW, you know, during that period, BMW brought out the GS 1300. And I think a lot of people saw that as the general malaise within the motorcycle industry. We were paying a lot of money for bikes like that, and we weren't getting value anymore. And I think that's the key, wasn't it? So what changed that? You know, what needed to change? Well, I think the motorbike market changed in terms of what people wanted. They didn't want big adventure bikes. I think the GS came out at a tipping point, really, and that's why I dare say it sold in huge numbers as usual. But, you know, there was a big clamouring, wasn't there, for the old 1250 GSs, that's for sure. But I think people started to want small adventure bikes. And there just wasn't anything really, or a very limited number of bikes on the market which filled that gap. Now what came into there was we had the new Himalayan came out. We had the the Triumph 400X. Okay, now the 400X is not really what we would call an adventure bike. It's more of a scrambler, isn't it? But it sort of captured the initial desire for small capacity, good looking, adventure styley sort of bikes that could do that job. But you only really had that, and then you had the new Himalayan that came out. So there wasn't a great choice. And this is where I think things became really interesting, because the Triumph did sell incredibly well, didn't it? I think they shifted something like 50,000 units, which showed everybody within the motorbike industry that there was a huge desire for that type of bike, that size and capacity of bike. I think the Himalayan did suffer a little bit because it came out just too long after the Triumph. So people were gagging to get their bikes, and I think they jumped on the Triumph, and the Himalayan got sort of caught out a little bit in its timing wise. Although it does still, you know, it's a very popular bike, that's for sure now. But what we then had was this thing where we had the emergence of the Chinese adventure bike, and that was taken up, the mantle of that was taken up really by the CF Moto 450 MT, wasn't it? Now, as you go further down the line with that bike, it was the only sort of real viable alternative, wasn't it? Something new to the market, not a tighted up old bike, it was something new to the market. The problem with the CF was, I think it was available in such limited numbers that it struggled a little bit. It was a great bike, and it still is. But it slightly got forgotten a little bit in the whole melee. And I think also you've got this situation where, because the market was so devoid of quality bikes in that genre, that the Chinese, and then we're coming on to Chinese bikes, the Chinese saw that as a great opportunity, didn't they? And they were very quick to adapt their bikes and their manufacturing processes. And this is where I think it's important to remember that back in the day, you know, the engineering and the whole, you know, life cycle of things was much slower. But now it's incredibly quick, isn't it? The turnaround is so fast. And I think the Chinese jumped on that. They really saw an opportunity to really get into the European market. And I'm classing the UK as part of Europe there, really. But the Chinese did have a slight issue with, you know, they had this legacy of sort of quality and you know, reliability and spares backup and stuff like that. But boy, haven't they in the last 12 months really, you know, eaten into that. And Chinese bikes now, and again in this incredibly short space of time, commercially, have sort of become mainstream. We're not talking about now, you know, the chatter on YouTube and that is not about, these bikes are just not the quality. It's like, wow, these bikes are great quality, aren't they? Look at what you can get here. You know, the QJ Motors have really bounded into the fray, if you like. CF have got a little bit left behind, I think, in that. But you've got Vosges as well, and those sort of companies, and they've really hit the ground running, haven't they? It's this thing, if you keep telling people that the bikes are good quality, and I think they are, eventually people will accept that. And what I think it's done, I think the Chinese have brought value back into the market in a huge way. I think they've also rejuvenated the motorcycle market in an incredibly short space of time. And I'm not saying that we're just buying Chinese bikes, because to be honest with you, I don't see that many Chinese bikes on the road. This new sort of wave of Chinese bikes. But what it's done, it's given the mainstream manufacturers a kick up the backside, hasn't it? And now we see that they've understood that if they don't pull their finger out, that they're going to lose a huge market share. And one of the first to really take that on was Honda, because you then had the GB350 came out. That was a huge success. You know, they undercut the Chinese with that. with the cost really at the end of the day. There was very little under £4,000 that can match that. You still had the original players like Enfield with the Hunter and stuff like that. But, you know, Honda suddenly realised, look, we've got to start the fight here. We've got to put the sword in the stand and say, you're not going any further than this. We're going to actually take you head on. And I think Honda have done that. I think they still miss the real bargain adventure bike, Honda. But when you look at other manufacturers now who've come into that fray, you've now got Kawasaki with the KLE 500. So that's going to do quite well in the market, I think. Might be priced okay, but we will see. KTM came back into it with their new 390 Adventure. The only problem that's happened with KTM, and I will look back at KTM in a minute, is that they've had some issues with that bike, haven't they, with some of the mapping and stuff, which is, you think, God, these companies don't help themselves, do they? It's probably worth touching on the KTM issue. And I think that was a huge shock to the motorbike industry, wasn't it? That if you could have a player as big as KTM go down the pan, that was really worrying. I think there was obviously possibly a lot of mismanagement and issues around how they were retailing their bikes, with all the gadgets switched on your bike when you got it, and then they were switched off automatically and stuff like that. It was not a clever way of doing it. I think people got sick of that, and I think people were worried that they were going to see other manufacturers going to go down that line. Unfortunately, they didn't. I don't think KTM is out of the woods in that respect, but they've obviously restructured and they're working at it. But as I was saying about the new 390 Adventure, when you start pushing bikes out into the market which aren't quite ready, really, with those issues around the mapping and stuff, I think that it hits trebly hard when you're already trying to rebuild a reputation that's been tarnished quite severely. And I think that's quite dangerous for KTM. But, let's hope they sort those things out. But there's such a resurgence in the market. And then we've only got to look at, when you look at the modern retro classic bikes, the ever youthful Classic 350 is still doing great sales figures. We had the Classic 650 that came out. We had the Bear. I mean, the Bear was widely received. It was a fantastic piece of kit, which it was. And then you had BSA. Now, who thought BSA was still going to be going at this point, after the sort of problems that came with the Gold Star as such? And then they threw the Bantam at us. And look how well that's sold in terms of certainly pre-orders. It's really well received. So we've now got this situation where the big mainstream manufacturers have suddenly realised, Jesus, we've got to get on this, or we're done for. And I think some of them were. And now you've got Kawasaki, they've got their KLE. They've also now going to bring in the W230. I'm slightly sceptical about that. I think it's got to be flipping cheap to compete with something like the Bantam. I think 230cc's might be a little bit light. I think it'll probably perform well, but I just think it's a little bit lean power-wise to attract people. But we shall see. But we need to then look at another reason why not only has there been this resurgence in motorbikes in this 12 months later, where we seem to be in a really good place, but there's another reason why, a key factor, and it's around the dealerships. So let's have a look at that while I get my coffee, which is now bubbling away lovely. And I'll come on to that topic as well. Can't beat a decent cup of coffee, can you? Oh, God, I needed that. It's still warm, though. It's still very warm out here today. It's lovely. All right. Not only a great pack horse, but it also makes a good coffee table. So, what else has changed then? So, as I alluded to at the beginning of this, we had the issue around a lot of the dealerships closing down. And the dealerships that were closing down seemed to be main dealers. Okay, I didn't see it with the small independents, and I've had this topic before where I think if the small independents were clever enough, they were more agile in the way that they could, chop and change what they were doing. They could see that's not working, get rid of that, let's go into that. And I think the agility of small dealers was really important. And I think some of the main dealers are a little bit hamstrung in what they can and can't do, which is really frustrating, I think. So what we've now got, particularly in my area at home, we had the introduction of a new Superbike warehouse, Superbike factory, sorry. So, and which has done it incredibly well. And I'll come back to that. We also had the return of Groombridge Enfield. They went into the Harley dealership at Sykes down in East Sussex. We had the expansion of my local dealer, Billy's, fantastic. They expanded and they're doing really, really well. We've also had another independent come into Sussex. I can't remember the name, but they just opened up doing MOTs and stuff like that. And we had also the original Groombridge site was taken over by another dealership who've now taken on more of the GB Moto stuff, and they've taken BSA and stuff like that. So, the money's coming back in. People can see that there's money to be made back in motorbikes. And when you look for this incredibly short period in commercial terms of 12 months, it's sort of turned round, hasn't it? Completely turned round. And I find that fascinating, that's happened. But what's been the main, I think, the reason why there's been such a change in the resurgence, and it's finance. When you look at, when money's tight, what do people want? They want to be able to get the same products, but, at a monthly thing, when we used to do with catalogues. Remember the catalogues? And that's where the companies like Superbike Factory have really pounced on that, and they've seen, I don't say they're preying, well maybe they are, I wouldn't say they're preying on people that don't have the money to go and buy a bike outright, but at the end of the day I suppose they are. Preying is probably too strong a word, isn't it? Let's say they're facilitating that. And I've said before, how expensive it is to do that in the long term. But they've seen that the market demanded that, and people have flocked to companies like that. And Superbike Factory, particularly in Crawley, because it's a huge catchment area, have done amazingly well. I think the last time I looked, they were doing about 300 bikes a month, which is amazing. And I'll do regular returns to there just to see how, because I think they're a good barometer. But what you also had, so you've got these two things about money with motorbikes. Superbike Factory are coming at it from a demand for finance and easier finance to get your motorbike, to get people riding, if you like. The Chinese companies are coming at it from giving us good value and cheap bikes to buy. They're not doing that sort of finance sort of option, but what they're doing, they're giving you a cheap bike to buy with all the gadgets on it. So it's stimulating the market from that perspective, and Superbike Factory is stimulating the market from finance. I can't say cheap finance because it's expensive finance, but they're doing it from the finance end. The Chinese manufacturers are doing it from the value end. And I think the two things are sort of meeting somewhere. But isn't that interesting that those two things, particularly my area, have really stimulated the motorbike market again? And, I get emails from, and on the comments from my channel when I do different things, that there are people coming back into bikes that have come back into bikes in the last 5 years, let's say, that it's still that demographic of, my age group coming up to retirement. They've managed to take some of their retirement pot and they're putting it into bikes. But what they can do now, they're stimulated even more to buying bikes, because they can now buy these bikes, these Chinese adventure bikes. We get to this age and we think, what do I want a bike for? I want to go on an adventure. great, look, I can get an adventure bike with all the bits on it that looks like a BMW but doesn't cost the same as a BMW, and that's the thing, isn't it? So I think money is a big driver in this resurgence in motorbikes. But I think because there's this resurgence, we've now got all these other manufacturers coming in and offering these cheaper alternatives. BMW never really had a cheap. They had the GS310, but I didn't like very much. But they've now brought out the GS450, isn't it? Fantastic looking bike. What a great looking bike. I don't know what the price of that is. Is it 6,000 something? That will sell incredibly well, won't it? You put some bags on that, and you'll want to go on an adventure, wouldn't you? So I think the market at the moment, if we look at it now compared to 12 months ago, it was just all black, wasn't it? It was just all black 12 months ago. Now it's just light and great, and people are energised and really excited about motorbiking again. They'll already be thinking about what we're going to do in the spring. We're going to get all our bikes out. But I think we'll see more people out on their bikes in the winter. I think people want to get value out of their bikes. They won't put them away now. I think they'll want to get them out and start riding as much as possible. I also think that YouTube is still a huge driver of these markets. It really is. We don't have motorbike advertising on telly. It's all advertised through YouTube now. Everything is. It's such a major player in every part of our lives, isn't it, YouTube? And it's a huge part of my life. So, yeah, money, new models, the things follow, don't they? We find value, people want to buy it, we get stimulated, the market stimulates us even more, it sees how it's working, and it keeps prodding with new stimuli to make us go to buy more things. But I think the age of the big bike has had its time for now. I think we're in this world of small, lightweight, easily accessible by a bigger market of bikes, which was sort of started by the Enfield, wasn't it, the Classic 350, and I think a lot of people have now jumped on that, and that's where the money seems to be going at the moment. As with all things, people want more and things will get bigger, but I think that's going to play out for a while. I don't think people want big touring bikes. That seems to be a very quiet market, doesn't it? And some good bargains to be had. I think the big, ultra big adventure bikes, I think that market is really stale at the moment. I don't think there's an appetite for it, and that's due to the demographic of people like me that are buying them. We've been there, it didn't work, it was too much, and we wanted to scale back, and that's what we're doing. So yeah, interesting, isn't it? What are your thoughts? Why do you think we've had this resurgence? Do you agree with me, or do you think there's something else at play here? I think I love looking at this sort of stuff and thinking, wow, how has that happened? And I think next spring, when there's new bikes, probably more new bikes coming, I think it'll be fascinating to see who does really well, who really grabs the market at the moment, and that people flock to, a bit like Triumph did with their 400X. People would die for those sort of sales figures, wouldn't they? But there you are. Right, I'll finish my coffee, because my coffee always goes cold, but that was piping hot. I've got to get some more logs. I only need one more bag of logs today, just to keep me going. But it's a beautiful day today, absolutely stunning. Thanks for being with me in France. There's a couple of reviews coming up, which I've done in France, which you still got to see. I think there'll be one more after this. But I shall be back in the UK. And thanks everybody for sending me stuff from Milo subsection, because I've had loads of pictures. It's great. I'm looking forward to going through those. And eventually I'll try to do some more where I come and meet people. I've got some, I've put some feelers out for a couple of people to go and see, which are sort of local to me. And then eventually I'll go further afield, because I've had some fantastic invites, and it's really, really lovely, really touching. So, right, that's au revoir from France, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care, and please ride safe. And remember to turn your indicators off, because I'm still... I had to mention I still leave my indicators on. It's not intentional, it's just bad riding. But anyway, right, take care everybody, look after yourself. See you soon.